Today on Sci-Fi Fantasy Network, I'm talking to Jake Jarvi. He's the creator and producer and writer and co-star and everything else in Platoon of Power Squadron. Jake, could you like to start a little bit, tell about how you started with the Platoon of Power Squadron?
I'm a fan of genre entertainment. What I was really into at the time was actually horror movies. I wanted to do a series. I wanted to do like a series and horror series, which are kind of coming into vogue now, like American Horror Story. So I thought, okay, well, I also like superheroes, and Smallville was on TV at the time, and actually I wrote the pilot of Platoon of Power Squadron about a year before Heroes started, and then I was like, oh no! But it's very different than what we're doing. So I just was like, I like the superhero genre, and that's a thing that people are kind of into right now, so I'll just put my efforts in that direction. And I wrote a pilot script based on me and my friends. I asked everybody what power they would like to have. If it was a power that was too difficult for me to do effects-wise, I was like, what about this? I could do that. And then it just kind of grew from there. The first episode was really low budge, like as low budge as it gets. But then as our audience grew, so did our production quality, and we turned into something very, very different.
How would you say that your writing has changed since the first episode?
When I wrote the first episode of Pops, I was working in a video store, so I wasn't writing all the time. Shortly thereafter, I actually got a job for some magazines and everything, and so I was constantly writing. And that influenced my writing more than anything. Like, writing stories for magazines really helped me get into the habit of sitting and writing. In the early episodes, it was much more broad comedy based, like much more wacky kind of comedy, which leads to a certain establishment that I wish I had named differently now that we're not quite as wacky a show. The tone has changed from less wacky to there's still very comedic moments, and some of those comedic moments are still really ridiculous. So and there's much more mix of drama, interpersonal drama in the later episodes, but it still keeps a light comedic sci-fi tone.
Like you mentioned, you've got your jobs working with magazines now. Has that changed your writing routine at all?
Only insofar as it's easier to sit down, open the laptop, and start writing. I have to sit down, transcribe this interview, and turn it into a story and turn it in. I've got a deadline. Whereas I used to have to kind of like work myself into a kind of an inspiration phase where I would sit down and write a bunch, but I couldn't do it for a few days. Like, think about it, I'd wait until I was just like, I need to write it, and then I'd go write it. I can now just be like, I need to write it, and just walk over to the couch, sit down, and sit there until some writing happens.
When you're writing characters, how influenced by the actors are you?
Yeah, I initially wrote for characters I thought my friends would have fun playing, except for Eliza Tozer plays Virginia. I knew I needed a more kind of motherly character to the group, someone who's a little more concerned. So she's kind of like been accused in earlier episodes of being the wet blanket of the group. Once the actors started playing these characters in the first couple episodes, the way that they played them made their voices very distinct. Alliance for Sebastian, she can say whatever she wants. She's going to be all over the map, and she's going to be full of energy, and she's going to, be down for whatever. Donald is going to be a little bit more into what he's saying, He's going to try and make up weird, like, these elaborate phrasings of his, of expressing himself, which is a lot of fun. And I know Jonas is going to be just a dick to everybody.
You mentioned the first one is very, very low budget. I suppose since then, you've got a better idea of how you can write within budget, so you're not going to, randomly set an episode on a spaceship.
What I actually learned is that if you're writing toward budget, you're going to limit your scope more severely than you need to do. And writing what you think is interesting or writing what you think is called for, it's going to be harder to achieve, but it's going to be what's right for the show. So every time I have a script, there are scenes in there that I'm like, oh my god, how am I gonna get this done? And then, you work on them stage at a time. I need this location. Where am I gonna find it? You look for it. You talk to a bunch of people who have that location. 2 out of the bunch get back to you. You narrow it down. One of them's willing to help you. You talk to them. It's a process that takes forever.
Do you ever have a sort of challenge yourself, as it were? You write something and go, oh yeah, I bet you can't do that, and have a conversation with say, oh yeah, just watch me.
No, it feels like I'm probably doing that to myself, but it's not. In episode 8, there's a character who is shocking somebody else, with his electricity powers. And the way that the After Effects plugin for the electricity powers work, it's better if they're shocking them from left to right on the screen instead of front to back on the screen. But that was the way it was going to look best if it was shot in that direction. So I shot it that way without knowing how it was going to work out. And then you just go into After Effects and you're like, okay, if I take this element of that plugin and then I rearrange it in this way and I change the perspective on it like this and then I compile them together in a series, then it kind of starts to approximate the look that I'm looking for. It's not so much a challenge to myself as it is I know that this is the right way to do it for the show.
How does the audience affect the writing?
Interacting with the audience over a period of 6 years now, I kind of have an idea of what characters they like, what they don't like about certain characters, and sometimes I do take that as a challenge to be like, I'm going to change your mind about that person. There's a character on the show called Precious, and Precious was a very divisive character. People thought he was very stock in the writing of him, and people thought that he was either really, really annoying or they thought he was hilarious. Over the course of the last couple episodes, this last episode especially, I was like, I'm gonna turn the tide on Precious if I can. So that was the challenge I took on, and I feel like it worked out over this last episode.
What's been your favourite scene to write so far?
I think my favorite scene to write, because it came so easily, and that is when you're, as a writer, for me, is when I'm most enjoying it, is when I don't have to sit and think. There's these two characters in the show, Donald and Jonas, and there's a scene where Donald needs to be bulletproof, so they go out in the woods to try and make him bulletproof. And that series of scenes was the easiest series to write ever, and it was so much fun. Because those two characters, plus a third character, Spike, when you get those three characters together, they just start talking to each other, and it's just fun.
Sometimes it writes itself.
Yeah, it feels like it did.
When it gets right down to the wire and you find yourself having to rewrite because of, an actor's got sick or the locations had to change, the town has blown up or whatever. How do you deal with those sudden last minute rewrites?
Again, it's just sitting down and doing it. And it always feels like the end of the world. In episode 9, the villains have been in a certain location for the last few episodes. Decrepit warehouse that we shot in for 7 and 8. That location had no power, no bathroom. Is that a place you want to be at night for an extended period of time? So I was going to have him be in the courtyard from the end of 8. That location fell through. But I knew I had access to this boutique, which is not a place villains should be hanging out. So I had to justify them hanging out there. And it's just one of those things where sometimes justifying the things that crop up can turn into great opportunities for things that you never would have seen coming. And so the audience won't see them coming either.
Oftentimes, one of the hardest things in writing is finding the right words at the right time.
Writing is hard. Sitting there and making stuff up is actually difficult. If you were just making up whatever, it wouldn't be as difficult as trying to make something that makes sense, that is logical, that is interesting, and emotionally resonant. Okay, so you have carefully built a very structurally unsound Jenga. It makes sense, but then somebody comes over and pulls out a block and says, "You catch it." Like, oh my god, okay, I gotta hold the tower up while creating a new block to stick in there.
So what would your advice be to writers?
There's several stock answers to this question, and the reason that they are stock answers is because they are genuinely the answers. When people go to seminars, when people pay for, script consulting on their screenplays, all this stuff, what they really are trying to do is kind of put off the inevitable, which is sitting down and writing. Don't even wait to have the whole story in your head. Know where you're starting and who you're starting with. Know where you want to go. Odds are you might not even end up there.
Where would you suggest people watch it from episode 1, or do you have a preferred starting point for people?
Here's the thing. Once episode 10 is out, I think people will appreciate it more if they start all the way from episode 1. Get through the rough visuals of the beginning. If you want to go from where the story really kicks into high gear, episode 3. If you want to go from when we're looking good, episode 5.
Well, thanks very much, Jake. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
And everybody, go watch Platoon of Power Squadron on the YouTube.